Welcome, everyone, to the Global Boxing Network, your inside look into the sport of boxing. I'm here with my brother and good friend, Brendan Gibbons, and we got an epic show today. And before we get into the show, we want to encourage everyone to follow us across all platforms on social media and give us a like, give us a subscription, and let's get into it. Our guest today is an iconic member of the International Boxing Hall of Fame. You've heard his voice for decades, and he is none other than the iconic voice that we all know, Mr. Al Bernstein.
Hi, how are you? Well,
sir.
applause.
Yes,
you don't get that all the time on the show. Very nice to see you guys. Nice to be with you.
Al.
Yes. Now, before we get into this epic showdown with Canelo and Crawford, we want to just dive in, touch a little bit on the infancy of your career in broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just shed a little light on how it all started?
Well, ironically, when I started in journalism, I was in hard news. I was a newspaper editor in Chicago, and I really wanted to get into sports. And finally, after I moved up the chain of newspapering, and I was a managing editor in my 20s of this chain of community papers, I got an opportunity to write a book on boxing called Boxing for Beginners. And then I started, and I had boxed as an amateur, so I started writing for Boxing Illustrated and Ring Magazine, and that kind of got me into the boxing realm. And then when ESPN came to start doing their series in 1980, and they were very fledgling, they had not, they weren't in that many households. One of their stops was Chicago. And I clawed my way in with them for free, working for free. And I said, I know the fighters in Chicago. I'd love to help you. And I did. And then one night they were doing a show, and Tommy Hearns was sitting in as the analyst, and they wanted to add something, so I was there, and they said, could you sit in with us and do some commentary? I said, sure. So I did. They liked it, and that got things in motion.
Wow. Amazing. Wow. Now, most people don't really know that you fought in the amateurs. You've had how many fights in the amateurs?
I had about 30 or 40 amateur fights. I was in the Chicago Park District. Back then, fighters in Chicago or boxers were either in the Golden Gloves or the Park District. The Park District had a really great boxing program, and I walked in there one day and I was a big boxing fan, and I wanted to box, and started doing it, and it was great. I was a baseball player in high school, but I wanted to learn how to box, and it was a good experience.
Well, anybody who steps into the ropes is a warrior, and when you're taking shots, you have a different perspective of the sport.
Yeah,
so it's something that most broadcasters won't ever experience. So I got to give you the edge in that area.
Yeah, I think look, there are many people who have been famous boxers who are broadcasters, and I don't claim to have been the greatest boxer. I was okay, but you're right, Mario. What it does is it gives you at least a perspective of how hard the sport is, how tough it is to initiate strategy that you have, that you want to do, but it's not so easy when you're in the ring, So it gives you a little perspective in that sense.
Now, I have to ask this question because it's something that me personally, I want to know. I think some fans would like to know. When you look at the fighters from the past compared to the fighters of today, what is the major difference between those fighters from the past? And do you see a different light with those guys that come up a little bit rougher back in the 70s and 80s compared to these guys today? What is the big difference between that era, this era, and how do you see the difference?
For the fighters, one of the key things is they were more active then, obviously. Even the champions of that era in the 70s, 80s, the 80s was a golden era in boxing. It was one of the best decades ever in the sport. And even the biggest champions would fight 3 or 4 or 5 times a year often. And so they were much more active, and they got a chance, I think, to work at their craft more often. It was also an era, the 80s, where it's like other sports, like baseball is a perfect example. In the 70s and 80s, as an example, and the 60s, they just had a flood of great players. Well, boxing was the same way. That the 70s and 80s, especially the 80s, there was just a meeting of great people that came into the sport. It just so happens. And there were a lot of platforms to see boxing on back then. It was free on the networks in America. This is more an American-centric discussion in that sense. And it was a different time. The fighters of today are, of course, all very talented, and I'm not suggesting in any way that they're not equal to great fighters of past eras, but it's different. One of the key differences, I think, is the activity. The fact that fighters will go a year without fighting. I think it's a fair statement to say that has to diminish two things. It diminishes your ability to be excellent, and it also diminishes your ability to keep your fan base excited. So that part is a little bit troubling about the current era, but we have a time now where good matches are being made, and so I'm optimistic about that.
Do you think that comes with the fighters now compared to then wanting maybe more money now, rather than people coming into the sports in the 70s and 80s wanting to fight just because they wanted to fight? Or do you think it's just because there was just more activity, more more network?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is you can't make enough, there aren't enough platforms to make enough dates. Back then, with three over-the-air networks, plus HBO and Showtime doing boxing, you had so many places where they needed boxing that there were opportunities for fighters. A lot of times fighters don't want to be absent from the ring now, but they're almost forced to be. Their promoters don't have dates for them, and they can't put them on a fight. So I wouldn't ascribe it to fighters. I think some of the fighters would like to be a little more active, but sometimes the opportunities are not there.
Now that takes us to our subject of this epic fight coming up between Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford. I like to consider these guys throwback fighters. You got two warriors that are going to put it all on the line. Your initial thoughts on how this fight came together, and what are you thinking how this fight is just going to play out?
Yeah, to me it's interesting, and I don't know what you guys feel, but this wasn't a fight that organically came about. This wasn't really a fight that was on boxing fans' minds. Guys are separated by couple of weight divisions. There was so much talk about would Canelo Alvarez fight David Benavidez, who in the 168-pound division. Crawford had his share of potential fights at 154 or 147. This fight was kind of created, right? This is the analogy I would make is this is kind of like a super band that's put together. Like, this is the Traveling Wilburys or some of those bands from the past where they take all these stars and put them together and it turns out great. Well, hopefully this will turn out great, where you brought these two fighters together that it wasn't on our bingo card, but once it got announced, there's no question it took on a life of its own, and they're going to put, I'm sure, 50,000 people in Allegiant Stadium. So it's going to be available to the whole world on Netflix. So it has a great visibility because so many people have access to that platform. And so this fight has kind of taken on a life of its own. And it'll be interesting to see as we're heading toward the fight itself and on fight night, just how big it becomes.
Yeah, true.
We don't know, do we?
We
don't know, yes.
Well, speaking about music, you referenced Canelo and Crawford. What would a music standpoint, if I don't know boxing, how would you judge Canelo and Crawford under jazz or musical terms?
Oh,
what
that's
instruments would they be, so to say?
Yeah, what instrument would that's an interesting question. So here's the way I would look at it. Terence Crawford would either be a jazz pianist or a guitar player in a quartet or in jazz, right? He's laying down different chords, different doing some improvisation with those instruments and providing kind of the rhythm. And then over here, I'd have Canelo Alvarez. He's the saxophone guy, right? He's the saxophone guy who's capable of nuances, but he's putting it down, you know, in a way that you see it, you know, it's probably more nuanced than you think it is, but it's very definitive. So that'd be how I'd look at them as in musical instruments if you're talking about jazz.
Now, fun facts about this fight. Everybody likes to think of Canelo as the bigger man because he's fought at 168 pounds for the last few years, but in reality, he turned pro at super lightweight. As did Crawford.
True. Yeah.
And the facts are Crawford is 5'8", Canelo is 5'7.5".
Right.
So who really is the bigger man? And is it really that much of a factor?
Yeah, I think it is a factor because in this sense, Canelo Alvarez has made his climb up in weight over a long period of time. He's been in the sport for a long time. He's 35 years old, over 65 fights. He's been a pro now for almost 20 years. So he's made that weight move up over a course of time, and I think solidified himself at about 168. That ended up being almost the perfect weight for him, because his body frame, even though he's not real tall, he's just a strong, bulky big bone guy. And I think that suited him. 175, a little tougher, and we saw evidence of that in the Bivol fight, even though he did win a light heavyweight title. So I think there is a difference in strength, if you will. You're right. When you look at Crawford next to him, got a little height advantage. He doesn't seem like he's a tiny guy next to him, and he's not. But I think, Canelo is a true 168-pounder. We saw Crawford move up to 154 in his last fight, which, mind you, is still 14 pounds less than he's going to be fighting in this fight. So I think it's a factor, but is it a death knell for Crawford? No, not that.
We've seen in the past, too, with Canelo, with guys moving up. In the Amir Khan fight, Amir Khan went from welterweight all the way up to 155 at a catchweight. And Amir Khan was boxing the brakes off of him, moving, using his jab, doing really well. And then the sixth round came around, and it's all throughout.
That's the thing. I mean, that's what you wonder about. You don't know, And this fight, though, is interesting because there's so many variables. There is, ironically, Crawford's older than Canelo Alvarez, but has less tread on his tires, right?
Yes.
And we have all seen Canelo Alvarez, who has had a storied career. He is not some. I don't think his skills have been super degraded at all. But we've seen the fact that he sometimes has fatigue later in fights. He's clearly not the exact same Canelo of 3 or 4, 5 years ago. So the question of heading into those later rounds where Crawford has done a good job, there are a lot of dynamics to this fight that need to be answered, because your point about the Khan fight, which is a good point, that at some point the power of Canelo Alvarez got to him, and that may well happen in this fight. But if it doesn't, will the opposite be true? Will the fact that we've seen Alvarez kind of fade a little bit in later rounds, will that be an advantage to Crawford?
Does that come with then setting a tone between Terence Crawford's head coach and Bomac and Eddie Reynoso at Canelo? Do you think they're telling their fighter to set a tone? That means come out of the gate, set your tone. Canelo's a bigger guy. He has to come out and just assert himself. Or do they feel each other out and Crawford, comes up box and then banks towards the later rounds? Because we have seen Canelo fade, so is it setting a tone in two different ways, so then style class?
Well, what's interesting? Neither man is a volume puncher, right? Yep. Canelo is a counter puncher. Crawford only throws about 40 punches around. He makes them count, but then we remember Floyd Mayweather was not a volume puncher either. He made his punches count so much. So it would be out of character for either man to start super aggressively, right? That's not exactly who they are, though they're both capable of really good offense. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see if either man does do that. But I think when you talk about setting the tone, it isn't just about being aggressive, as you point out. Both men want to kind of, while there'll be that feeling out process earlier in the fight, they also don't want to give rounds away. This is especially true of Crawford because, let's be frank, Canelo Alvarez doesn't lose many decisions, right? And even the ones he loses are oftentimes closer than, I mean, we all remember the draw score with Mayweather. We all remember the fact that in the Bivol fight, the scores were not really reflective of how that fight went. So it is what it is. He tends to get more leeway with the judges. So if you're Terence Crawford, you want to make sure you're going to bank. If you're banking rounds, you better bank them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Terence Crawford has had plenty of time to add that extra weight. How do you think it's going to affect him in his new body?
That's a really good question. You know, he's not by nature just a mover. So, he's not the kind of guy that's going to use all 20 feet of the ring constantly. But will that weight slow him down a little bit? Or will it add power? Will it, how will he maneuver with it? But you made the key point. He's had enough time to get it done. And that's essential for the task at hand. What it'll do to him, we'll know on fight night. But, I think it would be a mistake for him to weigh in at a higher weight just for the sake of it. He should weigh in where he feels comfortable and still feels like he has the mobility, even if it's at the lower end of the 168-pound, frame.
Yeah, that could play into a Canelo factor if he wants to come in heavy and try to fight brute or be heavy, and he wants to stand there and bang.
Yeah.
And that's what Canelo hopefully is banking on, because if he stands there and bang, usually the bigger man in the past have shown that.
And Canelo, like you said, he is a counterpuncher, but that doesn't mean he's not offensive-minded. Yeah. So he would, if he can get that fight, fight it in, at semi-close quarters and keep Crawford in the strike zone, he can. That'll be helpful to him.
If they both fight and Canelo wins, and if they both fight and Crawford wins, does it affect either of the boxers' legacy? Yeah,
that's an interesting question. So, I think it's fair to say that there's a little more at stake for Canelo Alvarez because you're fighting a fighter who's coming several weight classes up. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, he fought his first fight at 154, his last fight. So really, you're fighting a guy that's been fighting at 147, and now we're at 168. Mm-hmm. And Mario's point's well taken. Alvarez was down at those weights, but that was a long time ago. So there's probably more pressure legacy-wise on Canelo Alvarez. And even a loss is not going to erase his legacy as a great fighter. That, people that do that revisionist history and boxing fans, let's face it, they are often glass half empty people. I hate to say it, but that's the way it goes. I don't think it ruins his legacy or anything, but there's a little more at stake for him. Yeah. And for Terence Crawford, he's playing with house money a little bit more, right? Mm-hmm. Because he's the one making the jump up, and and of course a lot will depend on how they fight, right? How does the fight go? I mean, Jermell Charlo, his performance against Canelo was a lackluster one. So it didn't enhance him, even in losing. But let's say it's a shootout, or let's just say it's a, razor-thin match. Either way, that could impact how people perceive them.
Yeah.
Now, there's the old saying in boxing, styles make fights. Mm-hmm. When you look at this matchup, do you think this stylistically is going to be a fight that fans are going to remember for years, or is it going to be more technical, something that you're going to appreciate the sweet science?
Yeah, look, I don't think anybody could look at these two fighters and say that stylistically this is a matchup that guarantees fireworks. It doesn't do that. However, it also doesn't preclude them. And to your second point there, we will see two very skilled boxers in the ring. And that part of it, I think we can definitely appreciate. Some of it's going to depend, as Brendan said earlier, on whether Canelo, his power comes into play. It's almost impossible to imagine Crawford knocking him out. I mean, he has an iron chin. And the only time, like, Bivol pushed him back, and even Mayweather pushed Canelo back a little bit, but they did it with a variety, with combinations, and maybe in Bivol's case, at a point where he had landed enough punches so that the accumulation of it kind of was making Canelo exhausted, and he got tired in the last part. So it's hard to imagine Crawford winning by knockout, but we could be in a situation where, depending on where we're at in the middle of the fight and who perceives that they're down or up, that one of them may step out of character a little bit and maybe initiate offense a little bit more, and that may create more fireworks. But it's not, these are not two fighters where you look at them on paper and you say, oh man, it's not like before Hagler Hearns or Castillo Corrales. Even though they turned out better than we even thought, we knew that it had a chance. It was likely to be, one of those wars. But this could be under the right circumstances.
Yeah. So, making your point, styles make fights. You'd have to judge in the judges then, right? You have Max DeLuca, Steve Weisfield, and Tim Cheatham. Their track record is usually boxers or, points and stuff and more effective blows. So it comes into factor. Maybe Crawford just tries to outpoint him, box and move.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And like cat and mouse. So it's an interesting style between, both guys.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with, when I say he can't knock him out. Yeah. Of course, that's not the only way he can win.
Yeah.
And it isn't even, he can win in an entertaining fashion without knocking him out. Right. And it can be an entertaining fight without knocking him out. And yes, you're right. If we go to going to the scorecards obviously presents risks, for both men, but I think even more so, it's incumbent upon Crawford to make sure that he solidifies those rounds. It shouldn't be. Now, trust me, what I'm saying sickens me to say it. There are two things in boxing I despise. One, when anyone describes a fight with an A and a B side, okay? There is no A and B side. I'm sorry, there isn't. It's made up. I know it's a thing because there shouldn't be an A and a B side with judges, with broadcasters, with referees, with anybody. But there is. But people say it. And then the other thing is a certain, judges tend to lean towards someone. I don't like the fact that they do, but sometimes it's just a reality.
Yeah. It's not easy to judge a fight. I would tell every person that has, whatever opinion on judges and referees, go sit down for 12 rounds, 3-minute rounds, and a break.
No,
really
it's not the easiest task.
Tell me what you scored.
Right. It's not the easiest task, but, and I don't think people get distressed as much when a fight is truly close and the scorecards are close. Then we kind of we disagree, but we might say, well, okay, we could see it that way. I think it's when the scorecards diverge in a truly absurd way that we don't quite get it.
Yeah. Now, me personally, when I'm judging a fight, I look at who did the most damage in that round. Other people like to say who scored and landed more punches. How do you score?
I'm on the landing more punches side.
Okay.
100%. Okay. Here's the reason. Even the offense that you do, we don't care if you hit a home run. It could be a wind-blown home run. You still get a run for it. If I land 7 solid jabs and somebody else lands a right hand that, for a moment, did I see him stagger? Did I not see him stagger? I'm going with the guy that landed 6 really good, solid jabs, because I think it's a sport where you do more offensive work, you get the credit for it. That's where I'm at. But I recognize your viewpoint, and a lot of people view it that way. It's really not the way, that's really not the way the scoring rules are written.
Yes.
Yeah. They're not written for that. They're written for, and here's the other thing people forget, and Adam Abramowitz did a great story in Ring Magazine this last month. You don't even get to, people talk about ring generalship and defense. You don't even get to that point. Those are things added on. The rules clearly state who does the better offensive work in terms of landing punches and doing offensive work If you can't decide based on those, then you go to those other criteria.
Correct.
So that's why for me, things like who's hurt, that might be a criteria. If you think it's a very, very even fight, then I'll go with you there. But if it's not an even round, let's see, you're judging a round, and one guy has landed 20 punches and the other guy landed 8, if he doesn't score a knockdown, I can't give the guy that landed 8 punches the round.
But then I'm a judge down here that saw the one punch hurt the guy, and I think, oh, that's more effective. So I have a different score. So it's very, very hard to judge.
Well, if the other punches that the other guy didn't land weren't real punches. In other words, if they glanced or they whatever. But if somebody's landing 20 punches in a round or somewhere in there, and they're actual punches, it could be body punches, could be anything. He's done all that work. I don't understand how they don't get rewarded because the one guy landed one eye-popping right hand. See, I don't see that, but that's just,
Now,
and that's what makes boxing interesting, right?
Very, very, very true. Everybody has their own
Yeah,
way of
you know,
judging a fight. and
Exactly.
everybody's entitled to the way they judge a fight. Now, going back to just the judges, some managers will like to say, how big is the ring?
Yeah.
How fast is the ring man? Who are the judges? All these factors are playing into this fight, and most fans don't know about that situation. Can you shed a little light on some of the fighter meetings you've been in where, the ring is too big or it's too small?
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's too fast, it's too slow. Some people don't really think about those things, but those play a big factor. For example, Floyd Mayweather always had a big ring,
Of course.
and it was a hard, fast surface. So
Yeah, and
shed a little light.
that's where some of talking about A and B side, but sometimes in the business end of things, some fighters have more sway, and things like that happen. Marvin Hagler, famously, when he fought Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler ended up making way more money in that fight than Sugar Ray Leonard did. A lot more money. He went for when they negotiated everything, he went for all the financial parts because he was confident he was going to beat Ray. Which, by the way, I think he actually won the decision, but even though it was, a close fight. But he allowed the ring to be bigger. He allowed the glove size to be bigger. He let them have all that stuff. And, turned out some of that was detrimental to him. So those are factors. And in this case, in this fight, I'll tell you, while on the surface of it, you would think Crawford would need a little more space to operate, and that might be true. It isn't as if Canelo is the kind of fighter that's constantly walking you down unless he hurts you. Yeah. If he hurts you, then he's going to be walking you down. And Crawford will use movement, but it's not going to be the kind of, four-wall movement that we see sometimes from boxers.
Right.
Now, going into the psychology of both these fighters, Terence Crawford, who I've been around personally, around him and felt his energy. I don't know him personally, but I was at his fight in Nebraska, and just being around him, you feel his energy, you feel his confidence. You just know that there's something different about him that separates him from other fighters. He's never tasted defeat. So in that realm, I believe his mentality is going to play a big factor on this fight. And I just believe it's going to be hard to beat him and just, you know what I mean? I know Canelo is the bigger man, but I'm just kind of just looking at that mentality. And Canelo has it too, but he has tasted defeat. What are your thoughts on the psychology of these guys?
Yeah, Crawford, listen, Terence Crawford he's got a me against the world mentality. And if there isn't, and even if there isn't a slight to him, he'll create one to give himself more of a motivation. And he doesn't believe he can lose. He's one of those fighters that just believes he's going to win a fight. And we've seen evidence of that. Perfect example is his fight with Sean Porter. Very close fight, right? People kind of forget that. Sean Porter was fighting a great fight, and it was actually a very entertaining fight. And he may even have been ahead on the cards, I think, near the time when Crawford stopped him, but it was very close. But Terence Crawford wasn't going to let himself lose that fight. And in those later rounds, he managed to get Porter down and out of there. And I think that fight kind of epitomizes Terence Crawford because he just didn't want to let that fight slip away. And so, yes, his will to win is extraordinary, and so far has not, been on the wrong side of a decision. And when that's the case, there's a reason for that. It's true that Canelo Alvarez has lost a couple times, but what we've seen from Canelo Alvarez is an ability to shake it off. He's kind of like a relief pitcher, right? That has a bad outing, and some of them are just, they have no memory, or a quarterback that throws an interception, they have no memory, and they just bounce back from it. And he's been that kind of fighter before, so we'll see if he's more vulnerable because of having tasted defeat before.
So what would you bring into a psychology-based mind to the event at Allegiant Stadium, live on Netflix, 300 million people around the world, free? Again, Allegiant Stadium, 60, 70,000 people.
Yeah, potentially.
You versus me mindset with Crawford, Canelo just going in like, I've been here before. What does that bring as an event? Does that bring the best fight out of it, or nerves?
It's interesting. What does that do? Because no matter who you are, I mean, we've heard from people who are the greatest performers of all time in entertainment who say, like, when they're going to a certain event or do a certain event, they admit they have butterflies in their stomach, even though they've done it a million times and they, have been on major stages. What's true in this case, Canelo has certainly been on this kind of stage more often.
Yes.
Because he's done it more often than almost anybody, fighting right now. It doesn't mean Terence Crawford hasn't been. We saw him in the Spence fight. That was a major fight, and several others that were big. If you were going to lean toward anyone being in any way daunted by the moment, it might be Crawford because he's had less experience at it. But you can't bet on that because of the things we've been talking about. He's a very focused, competitor who has huge belief in himself. But what all of that does do, the fact that it's in Allegiant Stadium, there will certainly be, as you say, I think it seats 70. The minimum probably that will be there is 45 or 50, possibly more. That's a lot of fans at a fight, and the availability of the fight, I don't think it's on the boxer's mind, also helps to create it as a major event. More people will see this fight than normally see any boxing match because it's more available, Yeah.
Now, these walkouts for some of these mega fights are pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Eminem walked out Terence Crawford against Spence. We had some major artists come out for Canelo.
Yeah.
Those are fun stuff for the fans. What was some of the most memorable walkouts that you've been?
Oh my gosh.
That you can go back and
That's
look.
a good question. By the way, Stephen Edwards, the bread man, who's a great trainer in boxing.
Yes, Stephen.
I had him on my YouTube show, and he talked for about 5 minutes on this, and he was dead serious. He believes walkout music is very important for a fighter.
100%.
He believes the right walkout music. He made the point that when he's been allowed to pick the walkout music for fighters that he's had, they have never lost. And he's not the kind of guy that's braggadocious or, this was more an informational matter. So walkout music does have an impact, and what your walkout's all about can have an impact. Is part of your walkout just a distraction? We've seen fighters be so enamored with the production of it and what they're doing and how they're interacting with somebody that's next to them or a whole production thing. And sometimes in the fight, they're not all there, right? I've seen that happen a number of times. And so the walk-ins that I think are most effective are the ones where great music is chosen that fits that boxer, right? It could be any genre of music. I think Marvin Hagler once walked out to Sinatra doing My Way, which seems, like, but it was perfect. That's who Marvin Hagler is. He's that guy. But clearly it is 8 million genres of music to pick from. There's all kinds of ways to do a walk-in. For an event like this, the temptation, of course, is to make it such a production number, which they probably will.
Yep.
But then our question remains, which boxer tunes that out properly, right?
Correct. I can relate to Breadman in one instance, and it was the Crawford Spence. As soon as Eminem walked out of those doors, and that whole arena was just jaw dropped. Because I don't remember the last time Eminem has performed or even walked with a boxer. And just the energy in that crowd and every person in there, it was like he won that fight. For me, as soon as he walked out, I was like, whoa. It was just mind.
And you would think it wouldn't have that big an impact, but he said it sets the vibe for the fighter. He said there's something about it that sets the vibe. And even the music itself, and music is such a transformative thing, right? Yeah. And so on one hand, it seems silly to almost say it, but when he went into it, it was one of the most fascinating 5 or 6 minutes I've heard anybody discuss. He was very articulate in discussing it.
Because you got to think Triple G, Manny Pacquiao, they had iconic songs from Eye of the Tiger. Manny walked out to one song, and every time you heard that, you were just like, wow.
Yeah.
Triple G, Seven Nations Army, the dun, dun, dun. So you're just like, whoa, this is the guy.
Yeah, that's
so it can play into it a little bit, but at the end of the day, I want my fighter to be ready where if there's no music, no people, they're ready to win. So
yeah, that's exactly right. And here's where, like we said, in an event like this, there is almost they'll feel the promoters and everyone will feel the need to make more of it. And so how will those, I'm as curious as anything to see how that plays out.
All right, well, I have a question for you then. I have $1 million question.
All right, I have a $100,000 answer. Go ahead.
What is your prediction? Canelo Crawford, Las Vegas? I've been on a bunch of different shows and in a bunch of different settings. And when I say this, one person actually said, oh, come on, you're being politically correct, or whatever. I forget what the phrase he used. And I said, no, I'm being honest. I don't have a solid prediction. Like, I can't say to you, I think this fighter is going to win 100%. I can say, under certain circumstances, what's going to happen. If it's a low output fight with low punch volume and it goes 12 rounds, Canelo Alvarez will probably win the decision. Yep.
If power becomes the main factor, Canelo Alvarez will probably win the fight. But if we get 12 rounds of enough output and volume, and Terence Crawford's working as a boxer puncher, he can certainly win this fight. There's no question about that. He's capable of it. But if you ask me, I know this is going to happen. Some fights we have an intuition that we feel like they can do that. We look at the two strategies and we say, yeah, but I think this guy's going to implement it. I'm just going to be honest with you. And I understand people having a definite opinion. I get it. I don't. I just think this is a very tough fight to pick.
Now, going into the attributes of each of these men, what would you say the number one attribute for Terence Crawford is?
Yeah, for Terence Crawford, I think, and let's take it, the attribute that may help him in this fight specifically, his ability to reel off combinations. He doesn't do it all the time. But we saw in the Spence fight and in the Porter fight, when he decides that he's going to rip off combinations, and that's how Dimitri Bivol bedeviled Canelo Alvarez. It was with his combination. I mean, Dimitri Bivol is such a good boxer and is capable, has great hand speed. He was reeling off those combinations. Canelo didn't have an answer for it. Couldn't counter them, right, which he wants to do. And that's the trick. Terence Crawford has to do enough offensive work and can do it with his combination punching that will make it impossible for Canelo Alvarez to counter him with the punches. For Canelo Alvarez, I think one of the things he does really well, and it might be overlooked here, is his body punching. When he throws a left hook, he's got a great double left hook, which if Crawford fights most of his fight as a lefty, which I suspect he will because that's the way normally he goes, I am a big proponent that the best way to beat a lefty, while we all think of the straight right hand, is really, and you use the right hand, is the double left hook, because that's where you want to, you can get to the body against the lefty and bring the left hook upstairs. So I think that Canelo's work, especially with the left hook to the body, is something he does very well, and I think that could be a factor in this fight.
Now, trainers, you got Bomac, you got Reynoso.
Mm-hmm.
How do you equate them, and what are your thoughts just on both of those men as trainers?
Yeah, I mean, they're both very experienced trainers, obviously. Bomac, he's never lost with Terence Crawford, so, and he's had other fighters who've been very effective at. I mean, both men will have good corner work done in their corners. I know Reynoso has had some criticism lately because, and this always happens, as you take on, when you are the flavor of the day as a boxing trainer, how many times have we seen it where they take on 4 extra fighters, don't really have the time to be with everybody, and then they get some losses? And that's kind of what happened with Eddie Reynoso. Here's the thing about these two trainers. They're not newcomers to their fighters, right? We've seen a lot of boxing matches in recent times where trainers are only working in their first or second fight with a fighter. If you're going into the biggest fight maybe of your career like this, I think you want to have someone there that knows you well and understands what you're capable of. And we can certainly say that's true of both these men.
Now, trainers have to give a certain amount of attention to their fighter, going on what you said. How important is it, and this is just more of a for the fans and trainers alike, how many fighters should a trainer have and be coaching to make that fighter the best it could possibly be?
I don't know if there's a finite number.
Right.
A perfect example of somebody who's been able to balance that pretty well is Robert Garcia.
Yes.
Who has a pretty full slate of fighters, and yet his record in the last couple of years has been really good, Sometimes you can, and he's got a great operation, in that gym. So I don't know if there's a finite number, but the higher the number gets, the more you're in danger of not being able to focus on all the fighters. And that's the question, frequently, we've seen trainers reach that point, and I've had several well-known trainers say to me, I had a feeling I shouldn't have taken on that extra guy or two, but they were asking me and they wanted me to, and then there's a financial consideration, and so you say, okay, I'll do that. How many times has anyone in life spread themselves too thin in whatever their profession is, right? And I mean, we joke about it, but people in whether it's in broadcasting or entertainment or writing or whatever, when's the last time, or an actor or whatever, when's the last time anybody said, I don't think I can do that project? Of course you say yes, right?
Yeah.
Half the time you say, it's like an actor being asked to do a Western, do you ride? Of course I ride, right? They've never been on a horse, right? But so people have it's hard to say no, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the difference between Reynoso and Crawford, maybe, not as much. Bomac as a team, Crawford is a coach also in a way, because when you go to Bomac, he's there every day pushing you, because again, Terence has that mindset of me versus the world.
Right.
So anyone that joins that camp has Terence in their ear also. Terence is running faster than you, but hey, I'm 4-0 and Terence is already here. I'm still kicking your ass,
Yeah.
He just has that mindset. So when you join that group, it's like the whole team itself doesn't want to lose. Dudes maybe down, like they're picking them up. They're like, hey man, like let's get it together.
Yeah, it's a very close-knit and effective unit there. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, Robert Garcia, you have the gym, you have phenomenal sparring, you have dudes that come in, boxers, you have something, but there's a little more like team and family with Bomac than them, because again, it's Crawford leading the bill with Bomac, and they just all want to win.
Yeah.
You can't come in and slouch, I don't think. So if there was someone to come in and they started, maybe they would be like,
yeah,
you have a tryout, maybe you're like, hey, we can't work with you.
Well, and you can make the case if you want to take that extended out, like we saw a couple of fighters that, Canelo Alvarez didn't have a role in any way with some of the fighters that Reynoso, and not that you don't have to. It's not mandatory in any way, shape, or form, but it wasn't that kind of thing. You have you have a superstar, and then all these other people, it's fine, and some of them are very well known, they're part of the group, and he would always, be supportive.
Yeah.
It wasn't that he wasn't supportive of renounced fighters, but it wasn't that it was a closely knit thing.
Yeah.
Now,
I agree.
before we wrap up, this fight is on Mexican Independence Day.
Yeah.
It's a classic weekend
Yeah.
for boxing. A lot of the Mexican fans are going to be rolling deep, and I know Omaha rolls deep with Crawford. They come out.
Yeah, they'll be
support
out
him.
here. And you know what? It doesn't hurt that it's in Las Vegas. People kind of like to come here.
Yeah.
Definitely.
They tend to like it, you know?
Yeah. So just on that subject, before we wrap it up, how do you think the electricity is going to be in the crowd?
Yeah, very good point. It's probably going to be more of a Canelo crowd in general. I think if you had to guess, you would think. But I think there's going to be plenty of support for Terence Crawford on hand. And I think, you know, we haven't had a big arena fight in the United States for a while, right? You know, where we've had fights in base basketball stadiums and places like that. But to have it in a really big, you know, it's like when you go over to Europe and there's a fight at Wembley Stadium or something. I mean, it's staggering. And this will feel that way. And that arena is great for people that haven't been there. You know, we've had the pleasure of being here in Las Vegas and going to football games there and other things, concerts. It's a very special building, and it's not a sterile building, right?
Right.
I mean, I know that sounds weird, but some indoor stadiums, whether they're smaller for basketball or bigger for football and baseball or whatever, they're sterile. No, this place isn't. It doesn't feel that way, right? And so you have a feeling of involvement. That's part of the reason why it's so good for music concerts and everything. So I think the fans are going to be into it. Yeah. What we all hope, and we don't expect, it doesn't have to be Gotti Ward. Yeah. It doesn't have to be Corrales Castillo. It doesn't have to be Hagler Hearns or Norton Holmes or whatever. It just needs to be a good, entertaining fight. And the undercard's pretty good. There's some good fights on the undercard. So hopefully that will be entertaining. And the reason you say you hope it's good is because when these fights happen that get eyeballs on them that boxing might not otherwise have, you just want to make sure that when the mainstream sports media is covering the sport, and they don't cover it all the time, and half the time they're ill-informed when they cover it, you hope that the product that they get is something that will project something good for boxing.
Now, this fun section that we like to call Corner Advice, we want to ask you, what advice would you give to Canelo Alvarez?
I would tell him, don't wait too long. Don't give rounds away. Don't have lull periods. And you can afford to take some time to figure him out, but don't wait too long in this fight, because if he gets his rhythm and he keeps going, he's a good fighter in the later rounds. So I would be reminding him, if there are 3 or 4 rounds that have been slow, I would remind him, you don't have to go crazy, but don't allow him to steal these rounds.
And for Terence Crawford?
For Terence Crawford, it would be kind of similar in a way, but it would be, make sure you keep your volume up. You don't have a counter in your head, but if you're only throwing 35 punches around, you're maybe not winning. So make sure that no matter what you do in terms of ring generalship and technique, that you throw enough punches.
Well, there you have it, folks. That wraps our episode of the Global Boxing Network, and we would like to thank the legendary Al Bernstein for joining us on the set. It was an honor. And we love your insight. And for you, the fans, tune in to the biggest fight of the year, Canelo versus Crawford.